All right, so we are going to cover, we're going to go through a quick round of, or just a round of introduction here in just a moment. And then we'll begin with a technical overview about best practices, muting, leaving the meeting, name changing, things like that. And then I will have some moments to talk about Christian meditation, and there'll be time for a Q&A. And then Pamela will talk about centering prayer practice, and we'll have time for a Q&A. And then we'll go over some general guidelines for our community here at Meditation Chapel. And then we'll have a time of meditation, a silence together, perhaps preceded by a short reading and followed by a short reading as time allows. And then we'll model our sacred sharing. And that is our agenda for our time together today. So let's proceed as best as possible. We can do this with introductions. I am Laura Waters, and I live in Brunswick, Georgia. I've been facilitating online meditations since Meditation Chapel's inception last February.
I'm Pamela. I'm currently in a little town called Seguin, Texas, and I've been practicing centering prayer for almost 20 years. I'm on staff with Contemplative Outreach, which is the organization that supports centering prayer, and I've been affiliated with the Meditation Chapel for about a year now, when Roger sent me an email and said, how about if we bring centering prayer to this platform? And I've been so excited about it ever since, because it's a whole new world when we all come together like this. So thank you all for being here today.
So I'm going to hand it over to Roger if you want to cover some of our technical aspects, such as muting when not speaking and all the other glorious things.
Okay, I will try to think of whatever I can think of, and you pipe up, Laura, or Pamela, if you anything I should be covering. So probably the first thing that you need to figure out is how to get into the chapel, which you've obviously figured that part of it out. And that's mainly a matter of knowing the URL of the chapel you're going to. We have three main chapels: the Thomas Keating Chapel, the John Main Chapel, and the Peace Chapel. So you just have to know which one of those you're going to and what the appropriate URL is. You're in the Peace Chapel now, although you actually could have gotten in here through the John Main Chapel because they share the same underlying Zoom meeting. But presumably most of you came in through the Peace Chapel. If you're going to a WCCM, World Community of Christian Meditation, those are normally in the John Main Chapel. And usually the Contemplative Outreach, the centering prayer groups, meet in the Thomas Keating Chapel. So you need to know which of those chapels you're going to, and you need to know the appropriate URL. The URL is that thing that goes up on the top of your browser. If when you register for the chapel, you'll get an email that'll have a link to the page that has all of the chapel URLs and a lot of other information. So if there's anybody here who hasn't registered for the chapel, that's really the first thing you want to do, because then you'll get all the information you need.
Yeah, I think the important thing there too is to say that we come in by the URL for Meditation Chapel and not by the Zoom meeting room ID.
Yeah, and the reason for that is that the Zoom meeting room IDs can change without notice. So I often have to close down a meeting, start up a new meeting. I'll always reset the chapel URLs to the correct place. But if you go in directly through the Zoom meeting IDs, then you just at some point it'll stop working and you'll have no idea why. So that's that. Then the next thing, let's see, we could cover is using the chat facility. So we've seen a couple of people doing chats, and that's a common thing to do, but it's actually probably not the best thing to do in general, because it's kind of distracting to see that thing light up, and it kind of takes us away from our time with each other. So generally, I kind of encourage people not to use the chat feature unless there's some really good reason for doing that. So avoid that if possible. Next thing, let's see, I can cover renaming yourself. If you hover your mouse around the upper, well, it's usually the upper part of your box, there should be like a little hamburger, those three lines. I'm actually not seeing it on mine right now, so I'm not sure where that is. And one of the options there is going to be rename. I don't know why I'm not seeing it right now. Maybe it has something to do with the recording. But anyway, you should see a rename option, and then you can give yourself, whatever a name that makes more sense. Usually the very first time you come into Zoom, it'll ask you your name, and then that'll become your default name from then on. So that's a good time to try to choose a good one. Another possibility, if you want to change that, is to actually set up a Zoom account, but I'm not going to cover that here because that's a little bit more complex. So as far as the muting goes, muting is probably the single most important function to do, because if you don't mute yourself, we get all the background noise from every microphone, and especially during the meditation time, but even during just the discussion, that gets very distracting. So you want to kind of get comfortable with how to mute yourself, unmute yourself, and figure out if you're muted. If you can tell if you're muted because a little microphone icon, which is actually several places on your screen. One place it is in your little box that's assigned to you, but also on mine. It's going to differ for different hardware configurations. But I also see one on the lower left. And if you see a line through it, a red line through it, that means you're muted. If you don't see the red line, that means your mic is live. So you can kind of experiment with that, and you should be able to see. I was muting and unmuting people when you were introducing yourselves, but normally we wouldn't be doing that. Normally you have to do that yourself, and normally what will happen is whoever is the facilitator will ask you to mute your microphone. But it's a good idea to keep your microphone muted, except when you're talking, but it's equally important that when you are talking to unmute your microphone, because otherwise nobody will hear you. And believe me, it's going to take a week or two to get used to that. Even I make mistakes, and I'll be talking away, and Laura will say, well, "Roger, your mouth is moving, but I'm not hearing anything." So don't be surprised if that happens. And then the only other thing I can think of right now is when it's time to leave the meeting. The best way to do that is you should see something that says "Leave Meeting" in red. It's probably on the lower right of your screen there. And when you click that, don't click that now, but when you do click that, that will take you out of the Zoom meeting. If you don't do that, then it's possible your user ID is going to get hung up in Zoom. So it's best just to always leave the meeting that way. And that's the kind of technically correct way to leave the meeting. You could also close the meeting window, but sometimes that causes problems. Usually it doesn't, but sometimes it does. What else? Is there anything else I should cover?
Why don't you cover, Roger, the video? Some people have video on, and it is, since we are a video platform, it is important to be seen and connected if possible. So why don't you cover that button?
Okay, so in the same way that there is a mute and unmute button, there is a stop and start video button. And generally, unless there's some really good reason not to, as Pamela says, it's kind of courteous to everybody have their video on. Some people may be on a platform that doesn't have video, and that's okay. We don't want you not to do this because you can't get your video to work. But if you can, it is it's courteous to do, because everybody, we see each other, and it helps us form a connection there. But if you need to, like, let's say, get up and walk around or something like that, you might want to stop your video before you do that, just so that that's not distracting to people. Or another thing that often happens, especially with phones, is that somebody will have a phone in their hand and they'll, kind of move it around to try to put it down. And from our perspective, we're seeing this crazy kaleidoscope movement, and that's very distracting. So, especially if you're on a phone or a tablet. If you're on a phone or a tablet, it's really best to have some kind of a stationary device that will hold it in place, especially one that's a little bit maneuverable so that you can adjust it so that the camera is seeing you. Remember, whatever you see in your box is what we're seeing. So if in your box you're only showing, from your eyebrows up, that's all we're seeing as well. And you want to adjust the camera so that it's a little bit lower. Anything else?
Roger, I have a question for you. On my screen, I can see 25 people, but down at the participant, I realize there are more people than that. Is there a way for my screen to show everyone that is present?
Most screens have some kind of a limitation. My screen is actually limited to 16 people. But if you look, I think you're going to see it on the edges, the left and the right edge. You should see something that says like 1/2 with an arrow. Do you see that? And if you click on that, that'll kind of bring you to the next screen where you can see another screen's worth of people. I'm limited. I'm on a Chromebook and I can only see 16 at a time. So I have
Thank you. I got it. Thank you.
worth. Okay.
Just a comment about the video on and off. It is a practice for some people that during the meditation part of the chapel, they will turn their video off since we're all sitting with eyes closed anyway. So for example, I can quickly turn my video off, let's say if we're going into silence, and then turn it back on once the silence has ended and we're coming back into a time of sharing. So if you do start to participate on the chapels, you will see that convention that some people adopt. And I also wanted to add, although there are chapels dedicated to certain practices like centering prayer or Christian meditation, all practices are welcome on this platform. All backgrounds are welcome. And so we just want to make that clear. That's one of the beauties of this community.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in other words, if you think of yourself as a contemplative outreach person doing centering prayer, feel free to drop in on any of the WCCM events and vice versa. We really have gained a lot from sharing each other's traditions. And hopefully in this year, we'll be able to reach out to have Buddhist groups and Zen groups and Muslim groups and others. So hopefully we'll have a very rich number of groups here. We already did. It's already very rich.
Excuse me, Roger. And we find that it is, the practices are complementary in many different ways on many different levels.
And the general formats of the group are roughly the same. So if you do attend many groups, you'll first of all meet a lot of people all over the world like we are at this moment in time. But you'll also begin to feel into the general format that's very similar. And that's intentional.
Yes, good word. True.
I was going to ask, how do you write
mention
to another person? How do you write it? I see messages cropping up at the top of the screen. How do you write a message? Like, you know, how do you do that?
You would use the chat facility, but I would actually discourage that in general because, you know, in general, it's a little bit distracting. So use it if there's really a good reason to, but
Okay.
generally avoid it, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Thank
At
you
least
for that.
that's my opinion. I don't know, Laura and Pamela, you may have a different thought on that.
Yes, it does distract a bit because you wonder where it's coming from, but you know, and you need to take that into your brain as well as everything else.
Right.
Yes, in the normal prayer groups, we don't use it. But for example, like Joe and Inga are part of another group where we're learning the practice of centering prayer, and we do use the chat function to ask questions in that forum, but typically not in the normal prayer groups on the meditation chapel.
Could you say something about the calendar?
Oh, okay. That's a good point. Let me bring up the calendar and I'll do something which you haven't seen yet, which is screen sharing. Let me just get the calendar up. Okay, so a lot of times, a lot of the leaders will do screen sharing, which I'm about to do now. So you can see the calendar. 1 second. And now screen sharing. And the calendar is useful. It's anytime you're in meditationchapel.org, you know, you'll see that there's a thing for the calendar. If you just click on that, it'll bring you to this page. And this page shows you all the meditation groups that are meeting. Today's Sunday, so that's highlighted over here. And you can see that if you look carefully, you'll see that this particular group is listed at 12 p.m. That's because it always shows you the meeting time of the group in your local time zone. I'm in Guatemala, so my local time zone is that this group started at 12, but most of you are probably in other time zones. So if you look at the same calendar, you're going to see that group meeting at some other time. And you can also tell from the color codings if it's meeting in the John Main Chapel, the Thomas Keating Chapel, or the Peace Chapel. So yellow is Peace Chapel, orange is, Thomas Keating, and then I forget, blue, I think, is John Main. So, so that's a useful thing. You can always just look there if you're ready to meditate and you'd like to see if there's a group. There's so many groups. I mean, look how many groups are meeting every day. So there's a good chance that there's a group meeting at a time that you'd like to be meeting in, and feel free to join them. There are a few groups that are closed. If you click on the calendar, let's see if I can find one. Like this one's not really closed, but this is really for 12-step members. So you probably wouldn't join this one unless you're a 12-step member practicing the 11th group. So, but if it says something like this one would say John Main and affiliated with WCCM, that's open. Feel free to come to that, or this one, which is a centering prayer group. Also, it'll show you the language. It's normally in English, but if that group meets in some other language, the calendar entry will show that as well.
And I do want to add that there are centering prayer groups in French, English, Portuguese, and Spanish at this time.
Anybody else have any questions on technical aspects?
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, I've gone to foreign languages that I don't speak, 12-step meetings, and it doesn't seem to make a difference. So why would it make a difference for centering prayer?
Pamela?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you?
I don't speak Portuguese, but if the time was right and I wanted to go to a Portuguese centering prayer meeting, would that be a problem?
No, not at all. And you would feel very welcome despite the language. So again, the groups are always welcome to anyone.
Okay, thank you.
I think what we say here, many of us on Meditation Chapel, is that silence is the universal language. So no matter what native language or what human language we may speak, we all share that silence and we all understand it as best as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a technical question before we move on? Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Roger. All right, so we will move into a time of just talking a little bit about John Main tradition of Christian meditation, and you're welcomed and invited to ask questions at any time. I think it's fairly a simple practice. It is a practice that John Main learned about when he studied the wisdom of the desert mothers and fathers, and also when he was he met Swami Satyananda when he was stationed in Kuala Lumpur, and so he brought back to us in the 1970s the practice of Christian meditation. And this, like I said, does go back to 4th and 5th century, and even before that. And what we are doing here is practicing the poverty of spirit and purity of heart. And basically it is remembering the one thing, which is practicing the presence of God. And so, as many people have said in the past, we have to have the courage of silence to go into this prayer of our hearts. And so what we practice here on Meditation Chapel, it is an interfaith community, but like Roger already said, we We have Christian meditation groups, we have centering prayer groups, and we have many other types of groups. But in the John Main Chapel, we practice this John Main tradition of Christian meditation. I'm going to share with you on the screen kind of the basic practice, the fundamental practice of Christian meditation. So Father John did teach that meditation is as natural to the spirit as breathing is to the body. And so this meditation or contemplation is common across all wisdom traditions, even though the method of practice may differ a little bit. So this is the discipline that he taught. And he recommended practicing this meditation, silent and still meditation, for 20 to 30 minutes twice daily. And he instructs us to meditate like this. Choose a quiet place. Sit down comfortably with your back straight. Close your eyes lightly. Sit as still as possible. Breathe deeply, staying both relaxed and alert. Slowly and interiorly, begin to say your mantra or prayer word. Listen to the word as you say it. There is no magic to the choice of this prayer word. Brief is best. John Main recommended the word Maranatha. This ancient Christian prayer is in the language Jesus spoke, is how Paul ends 1 Corinthians 16:22. To concentrate on it, we express it slowly and interiorly as 4 equal syllables. Ma-ra-na-tha. Continue repeating your mantra faithfully for the whole time of the meditation. As soon as you realize you stopped saying it, gently return to your mantra. Stay with the same word during the meditation and from day to day. Do not evaluate your meditation and try not to be discouraged by distractions. They will come, and they will keep coming, no matter how long you practice. So let them come and let them go, always keeping attention on the word. And in time, over time, the fruits of meditation will become manifest in your life, in relationship with yourself and in all your relationships. And I think in this practice, what has been said is that we develop relationship. We develop relationship with our journey, with other people, and with God. And our basic job, if we want to say that word, is to empty ourselves into the poverty of that one word. So in silence and in stillness, we let go of other relationships with our thoughts, with images, with illusions, with fears, with desires, with ego. And each time we meditate, we're detaching from programs, from conditioning, and we enter our rootedness, the ground of our true being. And we are brought into the spacious place with the source of all. So that's John Main's basic Christian meditation practice. Does anyone have any questions?
I just
Yes, Francis.
I just want to say that I love this, and what really helps me with this is the daily readings. I don't know, it's one of his books that has these daily readings, and it continually speaks to my condition and helps me to integrate this. You know, the John Main, one of the daily reader, I forget what you call it, but anyway, just wanted to offer that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that book is Silence and Stillness in Every Season by John Main, arranged per the calendar year. There are readings for meditations every day.
Yep, that's it. Yep.
Anyone else have any questions? And Pamela, over to you.
So there are a lot of similarities between Christian meditation and centering prayer, and our purpose in sharing these two methods is just in case any of you have a question about how to meditate or which method might suit you. And you're certainly welcome to try both of them if that is a question for you. I'm going to also share a brief document about centering prayer. Much of what Laura shared in terms of how to do the meditation or why we do the meditation and even where the meditation comes from is the same. So Father Thomas and Father William Menninger and Basil Pennington were all monks together during the 1960s in Spencer, Massachusetts, and they noticed that a lot of young people were passing by the monastery on to Eastern meditation centers, and they realized that there had always been a way of praying in silence that was not known outside the monastery. And so what they did is looked through the tradition, like the Desert Fathers and Mothers, the Cloud of the Unknowing, the Judeo-Christian scriptures, and began to see that there was a method that could be formed that had been part of the instruction for centuries, but just not codified. So the real purpose of centering prayer is, first of all, we acknowledge that God is present to us in our inmost being. It's really based on the reality that God lives us and lives within us and is present to us in each moment and in our being. And scriptures like Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am God," and Matthew 6, "When you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." And that reward is not really anything to do with merit or behavior. It's just the relationship revealing itself as a moment-to-moment reality. And so centering prayer is one of the methods, like Christian meditation, that we can go into our inner room and close the door and be with our God. And it's all about a deeper relationship with God that is beyond thoughts, that is beyond words, that is beyond emotions, that's beyond really any of our faculties. And it's a gentle turning of our intention and attention to consent to God's presence and God's action within. Centering prayer is often known as the prayer of consent. That consent is really at the heart and soul of the practice. And what is meant by that is that we really need to give our consent to be with God. In other words, to open so that God can come in. God will never force God's self upon us. It's really asking, opening, and turning our will over to God. Centering prayer is based on 4 very simple guidelines. Again, some of this is very similar to Christian meditation. The first guideline, choose a sacred word as the symbol of your intention to consent to God's presence and God's action within. And there's no special word, there's no word that's more powerful than another word. The sacred word is really just a word that symbolizes our intention. And we recommend that you choose a word that's simple, of 1 or 2 syllables. It could be love, it could be peace, Jesus, Spirit, consent, come. It could be a word in a different language. The word itself does not matter. It's just that you are imbuing it with your intention to consent. The second guideline is sitting comfortably and with eyes closed. Settle briefly and silently introduce the sacred word as the symbol of your consent to God's presence and action within. In centering prayer, we're not repeating the sacred word as a mantra. We're simply introducing it whenever we find ourselves engaged with thoughts, which brings us to guideline 3. When engaged with your thoughts, and in the context of centering prayer, thoughts include body sensations, feelings, images, and reflections. So anything that is coming up during the prayer is considered to be a thought. And whenever we find that we are engaged with thoughts, we return ever so gently to the sacred word. And Father Thomas often described that return as taking a feather and laying on it a piece of absorbent cotton. There's no violence in centering prayer. It's very gentle and open. In guideline 4, at the end of the prayer period, remain in silence with eyes closed for a couple of minutes. And this is just to transition from the depth of consciousness in relationship with God into the ordinary consciousness of everyday life. So it's just giving us a time of transition. Joe asked me to speak a little bit about the sacred breath. So sometimes people will also use breath or what's called a sacred image. And those are other sacred symbols that, just like the sacred word, we don't follow our breath or we don't gaze at an image during the prayer. We just use these as touchstones when we find ourselves engaged. So the breath and or in a kind of gentle inward glance can also be used in centering prayer as your sacred symbol. I'll stop now and ask if there are any questions. Okay, I don't see any. Laura, I'll turn it over to you. And of course, if there are any questions about the prayer after this introduction, you can always contact us via the chapel and we'd be happy to answer further questions. Thank you.
Could I just add one short thing here, and that is that, you know, if you're a centering prayer person and you're going to a Christian meditation group, don't feel like you have to use their methodology. Use whatever it is that you're comfortable with. You know, don't shift your practice. In my opinion, it's just better to stick with what you're comfortable with. It's going to fit in fine with whatever group you're in.
Thank you, Roger. Yes. Excellent point. All right, so we'll move into our, just talking a few moments about our general guidelines on Meditation Chapel. And Pamela and Roger, anytime, just jump in to interrupt, contribute, correct, etc. So in our sacred sharing time in the John Main Chapel, usually our meditation sessions last for an hour. So we have an opening reading, then we have 25 minutes of silent meditation. Some facilitators use a closing reading and then a prayer and then a lectio. There's usually some kind of variation on that, depending on who the facilitator is. But almost everyone uses a text for Lectio Divina. And so we have that reading, and then we enter a time where we're sharing based on whatever resonated with our spirit from that Lectio text, or what resonated with our spirit from one of the readings, or something that comes from our silent time together. And so we honor that sacred sharing, and it's not like we're having a conversation necessarily. Sometimes that does happen, but it is about us sharing from that deep, silent, still place within us. And then we also practice deep listening in that sharing, so that we're not trying to offer advice. We're not here to fix anyone. We're here to be in community and to practice the presence of God. And so we honor that with sacred sharing and with deep listening. And that also means that both before and after someone speaks, we have a time of silence. We surround that person's words, thoughts, feelings with silence. So we're going to call that practicing the holy pause. And let's have some silent time in between people speaking in our time of sacred sharing. So, I'm one that does this sometimes is I get really excited or enthusiastic about what I'm hearing from the Spirit or what somebody else is saying. And so it's a great practice of reserve and poverty of spirit for me to remain in that silence so that it is reverent and that person's thoughts, feelings, etc. are respected. Pamela or Roger, anything to add to that?
I think the other thing to add is also giving space so that everyone can share if needed, to try to share briefly, and then in that to give others in the sacred listening a chance to also have time to share, which can be a challenge if the groups are larger, but that usually doesn't seem to be an issue on the chapel.
Very good, thank you. Yes,
Yeah, if we could just add one thing, and it's not a time to give a whole sermon on the reading you just heard. You should really be sharing what this is meaning to you at this particular time, and understanding that everybody has heard the same thing, but everybody hears it differently. And by listening to the way other people hear it and how it struck them, we'll all be enriched by that. So try to keep your responses to, this is what this meant to me when I heard it this particular time.
all right, very good. Yes,
Not the time to show how much you know about Paul or something like that.
Thank you, Roger. Yes, so we sometimes we need to make sure we're watching the number of people who are in our group. Say if we end our time of meditation into our Alexio at like 2:35, so we'll have 25 minutes left for that sacred sharing and deep listening. So it might just be that we have like a minute for every person to share something real for them, and that is definitely important. Thank you. Anyone have any questions about our general guidelines here? A beautiful contemplative group. All right. Well, we're going to go over a little bit of our hour that we said we were going to be here. So hopefully that is all right with everyone. We understand if someone needs to leave. But what we're going to do next is just spend some moments in silence together. And then we thought we would try to model those sacred sharing, deep listening, and practicing the holy pause guidelines that we just talked about. So maybe we'll have, Pamela, do you have a reading by Thomas Keating that you were going to share to begin with?
I don't have one by Father Thomas. I have one that is part of the Centering Prayer app that I've been praying before some of the prayer groups, and it's very short. This is by the Swiss mystic Nicholas of Flue. My Lord and my God, take from me everything that distances me from you. My Lord and my God, give me everything that brings me closer to you. My Lord and my God, detach me from myself to give my all to you.
I'll close out our reading with, our meditation time with a reading from Father John Main. I tell you the truth when I say that this work demands great serenity and an integrated and pure disposition in soul and body. God forbid that I should separate what God has coupled, the body and the spirit. Indeed, we owe God the homage of our whole person, body and spirit together, and fittingly enough, he will glorify our whole person, body and spirit in eternity. I'm sorry, that's really from the Cloud of Unknowing, not John Main. My apologies. So we'll can enter a time of sacred sharing and deep listening. If we'll go until about 3:15. So if anyone has anything that resonates with their spirit, from the readings, from the silence, from our time together, you're welcome to offer that. And please remember to unmute your microphone if you're able before you speak.
The realization coming from that reading that the things that separate me from God are the things that I put before God. And that there was a trueness in that prayer for me, because I've been set on a Lenten journey, and that just kind of reinforces the whole idea. It's not to become good, or it's not to make changes for the sake of changing. It's just to come closer to God by removing my own barriers. I never experienced that before. I was always thinking that I had to change to become a good person. And this is reminding me that I have these barriers that I have the option to remove so that I may become closer to God in my relationship. Thank you for both readings.
What struck me in Pamela's reading, and I don't remember the third part, but it doesn't matter. What I remember is enough. The first part said to me, "Dear God, take from me what I don't need." And the second part said, "Please fill me with what I do need."
I really liked Pamela's repetition of my Lord and my God, because that reminded me how I sometimes take God just for granted, like, oh, he's here, he loves me, blah, blah, blah. But that made me really feel like I'm praising God and I'm appreciating him, and he is here with me every day. And I love that, my Lord and my God. Thank you.
What I'm feeling in this moment is just some healing and sense of unconditional love, which is what this meditation chapel does for me each and every time I participate. There was a contentious exchange this morning with family, and coming into this circle now, it just feels like all is well and everybody's doing the best they can. So just the presence of everyone here today has just healed something for me.
What I'm feeling is gratitude that these two nonprofits can work together. You know, the Contemplative Outreach and the WCCM, that because I need both. I do. And then I also, what's interesting is I never would have said this a few weeks ago, but I'm also getting real value from occasionally sitting in on A Course in Miracles in the Peace Chapel. You know, it's like, wow. You know, mostly I just go there to get an extra quiet time to sit with them, but it's like, oh, there's value there too. You know, so I guess the bottom line is I get to work on Francis's attitude. I get to, you know, on a daily basis, I get support here to, there's a Quaker, one of the Quaker fun thing, you know, every spiritual tradition has this little fun little things. Quakers say faith is finding answers in the heart. Finding answers in the heart. So the journey continues.
I just would like to say that I find great joy not only being connected with people in different states, but in different parts of the world, and the sense of this being the whole human family being able to connect in some way. So that brings me a lot of joy.
Along that theme, I want to add that, you know, people who pray this way are not your average run-of-the-mill folks. And I think sometimes we may feel like we're a little bit odd ducks. At least I do sometimes. People scratch their heads and can't imagine doing what I find comes so naturally. So the sitting with you today felt so encouraging, felt so welcoming. As someone who leads and facilitates some pretty difficult groups in difficult places, it's just nice to not be in charge and to just be with other seekers who are so accepting. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, so as not to hold you up any longer past our time together, does anyone have any final thoughts or questions that they would like to offer?
One thing I forgot to mention is that, you know, we do have a Facebook group that's a lot of activity on that, and I invite you, if you're a Facebook user, to join that. The easiest way to find it is to, let me share. If you go to any of the bottoms of any of the pages on the Meditation Chapel, you'll see a little thing that says Facebook, and if you click on that, that will take you to our Facebook group, and the first time you'll have to join it and answer a couple of questions. Should come up any moment. There it is. So that's the Online Meditation Chapel Facebook group, and often there'll be announcements there. People will post prayer requests, or they'll post the readings that they did, or any number of things. So it's kind of a neat place to be able to spend some time. It's kind of a place of sanity within the Facebook cacophony.
Well said, Roger. All right. Well, if you have any questions, like Pamela said earlier, please contact us at Meditation Chapel. You can send me an email, and if I don't have an answer, we'll try to find someone who does. It's Laura at meditationchapel.org. And I want to thank you all so much for being here today and for your pilgrim's heart that you carry with you. And thank you for being here as we continue to expand our being together in this beautiful community. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing all of you another time very soon. Thank you. Much love to you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Laura and Pamela.
Thank
Bless
you.
you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
You too. Nice to meet all you wonderful people. Nice to meet you people that I already know.
Bye.